How often is it that you find yourself feeling disappointed or let down by somebody because you had certain expectations of them, which they just don't deliver? Are we feeling exhausted? Are we feeling hurt by these expectations that didn't happen? And it's not even something that we've perhaps voiced to them or even to ourselves. Welcome to the High Sensory Mothers podcast, a space for intuitive mothers who experience the world deeply. You might know this as high sensitivity, being an HSP, or my preferred term is having high sensory intelligence. I'm your host, Karen Hunt. Let's dive into today's episode. Hi, and welcome to the High Sensory Mothers podcast. I'm your host, Karen Hunt. And today we're going to be looking a little bit deeper into boundaries, standards, and expectations. We've explored identity and energy a little bit already, and also boundaries. And we are going to go a little bit deeper with that today and focus more on the energy drain that is expectations. So you may remember that we've talked about boundaries before in earlier episodes. What I've realized is that it's all very well to talk about setting boundaries, and sometimes I think we don't even notice when we have these sort of unconscious expectations of people, which is a real energy drain for us. And so because looking after our energy is so important, I really wanted to talk about this a little bit more. I'd just like to ask you a question to reflect on first of all, which sets the tone for this episode. How often is it that you find yourself feeling disappointed or let down by somebody because you had certain expectations of them, which they just don't deliver? Are we feeling exhausted? Are we feeling hurt by these expectations that didn't happen? And it's not even something that we've perhaps voiced to them or even to ourselves. So we're actually feeling let down in some way because we had a hope and an expectation that just wasn't met. So it's quite an energy drain when this happens to us. And it is something that I think if we can take a look at that, we can see that perhaps it's our responsibility to really clean up our own expectations of others and take some responsibility for how we're feeling. That's what I'd like to focus on, this understanding that by taking responsibility for how we're feeling and what unvoiced expectations even that we have for others, how draining that can be, and so how helpful that is when we pay attention to that and we realize that they even exist. And when we can do that, then perhaps we can make better use out of the energy that it takes us to focus on this, and we could actually turn it towards ourselves, and then perhaps we're able to use that energy to set some realistic boundaries with others, and also to maybe even set up some standards for ourselves and for others too, which it just comes from a healthier place than just expectations. So the way I look at this is I see there are 3 circles. Imagine a Venn diagram, and you've got one circle with expectations, another with boundaries, and another with standards. And where they intersect is self-responsibility. So let's just have a look at each of these layers in turn. The expectations that we have is a rather passive, external, focused and hopeful state of being. It's often an unconscious feeling. It's an unconscious awareness. And it's just focused from outside of ourselves, outside of what we feel we are capable and confident to bring about. So then we have boundaries, which are more conscious because they're ones that we either think about for ourselves or we might voice them to others. So they can be boundaries that we set for ourselves, or they can be boundaries that we set for other people in relation to ourselves. So it's a far more active way of interacting with our immediate surroundings or the people in our lives, or even just ourselves as well. It's a way of giving ourselves a layer of protection around us rather than with an expectation. It's almost like we're hoping that layer will be there, or that somebody will provide this layer of protection for us. Whereas when we set our boundaries, we are actively choosing to enact this protective layer. And that can be to protect ourselves, our own energy. It can be for our families or our work. There's obviously a variety of ways you can use boundaries, but it's a way of protecting what you need in your life. So it's certainly a healthier way of getting your needs met. And it's a more reliable way of getting your needs met as well, because expectations is almost like rolling a dice. You don't know whether or not those expectations will happen. Whereas when you've taken that active role of setting boundaries, you have a far greater chance of people adhering to those boundaries. And so the third circle that I look at is standards. And for me, a standard is something internal that I set for myself. It's a non-negotiable, and it is something that I can share with others as well, but it's done in a clear way. So there isn't necessarily any expectation that other people will share your standards or even take notice of your standards. But that isn't the point of it. The point of it is that inner clarity. It's done for you and your benefit. So you know that this is your standard and that's what you decide to live by and to live with, regardless of what anybody else does. For example, you might have a standard when it comes to work, in that you will only work, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, or whatever hours that you set. And you don't engage with work outside of those hours because you prioritize taking care of yourself, taking care of your family, having a social life, engaging in creative projects you might have, whatever it is, that you set that boundary, but it's also an internal standard. So when you're setting the boundary, you might have an email autoresponder, for example, that goes out to clients that says, these are the hours that I'm available. And that's you setting that external boundary. But internally, the standard is, I just don't look at my email at weekends. So there's a slightly different flavour to it, and a standard is there regardless of whether anybody else is affected by that or not, or involved in that or not. And that's a very conscious choice, and it's a mature choice to make, and it isn't an easy choice to make. It can be quite tricky to set those standards, but it's just declaring to the world, this is what I allow in my life, and conversely, this is what I don't allow in my life as well. And I find this to be really important for us as HSPs, highly sensitive people, high sensory people, because we feel so deeply and because we pick up on nuances and we really are attuned to other people and their needs. It can be quite tricky to navigate this whole area because, first of all, we really need to just tune into ourselves and figure out what's important to us and get clear on what our needs are. Then we have to consult really with other people and what their needs are. And sometimes it's quite tricky because we're so empathic to navigate what's ours and what's theirs. The other thing that I find is that we can prioritize other people and their needs ahead of our own. And so perhaps we give too much weight to what it is that they say they need, or maybe they don't even say they need it, what we imagine they need, and therefore what we imagine we need to provide for other people. And often that's just not the case. They really don't need as much as we think they do. As a mother, when you've got young children, you might feel like you have to be there for them 24/7, when actually somebody has to be there for them 24/7, but it doesn't always have to be you. Even when they're really, really little, it doesn't always have to be you. So I think we need to watch out for what we really need and be realistic about what other people really do need. We tend to need a lot more rest, recuperation, and processing time than other people. And so we might still want to give others more time, which takes away from the time that we actually do need. You know, if someone else is grumbling in the family that they don't get all their needs met from you, for example, I think you really have to take a step back and assess whether that's just a preference for them, or is it something that you've essentially trained them to believe because you've been like this for however many years. And so when you start, quote unquote, putting your foot down, which is what it can feel like, and that can be really uncomfortable for other people who aren't used to that, whether that's you just voicing how you're feeling or what it is that you need and you haven't done that much before, or whether it is you just changing what you're doing and how you're doing it and people don't like it. I think as long as you can spend some time to reflect and work through this, perhaps with a coach or a mentor or a friend, or journaling, go through that process and assess realistically and as objectively as you can what they really need. And I know it's very hard to do that, but try and do that, because in the long run, you are going to help them become more independent of you. You are going to save yourself from potential burnout, and you will help them in the long run as well as yourself. So it is a win-win, and that's very much what I'm always going for where I can. It is a win-win. So it might look like a lose for them in the short term and a win for you, but actually in the long run, it should be a win for everybody. And I think one of the things about these expectations that we talked about are a part of us that wishes for more time or more understanding and empathy, compassion from others. In the way that we're providing it to them, we want it back. But perhaps we feel like, well, they're just not capable. They're not HSP. They don't understand. And so we're sort of almost drowning or feeling the weight of these unmet expectations that we have. And that can be really debilitating over time. It's like one layer after another gets pushed on us, and we just get overwhelmed, and we can feel like we're drowning in it. And it's very draining for our energy. And it's unfair to the other people that we're putting these expectations on, because their responsibility is to themselves ultimately, and our responsibility is to ourselves. And just because we have this incredible gift of empathy and compassion doesn't mean we have to use it all the time on others. We must turn it inwards and use it on ourselves for as much time as we need to fill ourselves up and, to fill our cups, so that when it's time, we can turn that attention to the people in our lives that are important to us. And that's going to be family. It's going to be people that we work with when we're doing meaningful, purposeful work. We've got to have enough energy to do that. If we just let people pile their needs on us, and we almost have these breadcrumbs that we're accepting because we just we're hopeful for these wishes that other people would provide for us. If we just do that, we're not fulfilling our purpose, because we're not generating the energy that we need in order to make this difference we want to make. So it is our responsibility to carefully understand what our gifts are and how to use them best for the benefit of everybody over the long run. And I think that's the important thing, not to get too caught up in the short term, but to have a longer term view of the importance of resourcing yourself, taking the time that you need where you can. And that way, we're not being unfair by having these expectations set on other people. We get clear within ourselves what our standards are, what our boundaries are, and then communicate those. It's a lot easier said than done sometimes. I do understand that. It's taken me a long time to get to this place, and I'm still not 100% comfortable 100% of the time with this myself. But it is the way. It is the only way that we can drop the expectations, stop the disappointments and the hurts which are unnecessary, and to take self-responsibility, which is a wonderful thing to model to our children, to our clients, to our families, to everybody in the world. If we were all more responsible for our own thoughts and actions, then I think the world would be in a better state than it is currently. And so this is important work that you do, and I applaud you for tackling this, because it's not easy, but it is so worthwhile. So I hope that this can help you reframe how you see self-responsibility. It can feel like quite a harsh word and quite cold, which is the very antithesis of what we're about. But I find that it's quite a nourishing word when you see it from this perspective. And then when you set your own standards for yourself and for your life, then it's quite calming. And I think we have sensitive nervous systems, no doubt, and it can be quite soothing when you set these standards. And it helps me not feel as frazzled or as manic sometimes or as stressed and anxious when I do set standards and boundaries. And I used to think that it would be a problem for other people for me to set standards. I didn't like to disappoint other people, but actually I find they're quite accepting and understanding, and very often it's just not a big deal at all, which is liberating. So I find that there is definitely a sense of peace that can come over you when you have that inner clarity of your own standards and your boundaries, because I know that you would not set unrealistic, selfish boundaries. You know, you're going to be very considerate of other people and kind, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with setting standards and boundaries like that. They're not going to be unrealistic. You probably still won't go as far as you could. I hope that helps put your mind at rest, that the boundaries and the standards that you set for yourself are not going to be too much. Something that I think is important to do, and if you can think about any expectations that you have that you've set with someone. I find, well, certainly in my life, that it's very easy to set expectations with a partner because we have this belief sometimes, don't we, that they're our other half and they have strengths to our weaknesses and vice versa. And so it's easy to look to them to fill in these gaps within ourselves. And that can be where a lot of problems arise. Certainly, I noticed that in my own life, having expectations on others. Are you willing to have the same expectations on yourself, or is it just on your partner? And I'd like to invite you not to be too hard on yourself if you find that's the case. We've all been there, but just to notice it for now. And I think just that self-awareness is a really important first step. And just by being self-aware is helping you get to the other side of that journey to self-responsibility. And the other thing I'd like to just leave with you is what would shift within you if you were to really name that boundary or that standard within you and raise it to meet where you'd like to be, where you'd like to go. You know, what would that look like for you? So no need to do anything. I think just hearing this and reflecting on this is enough for now. There is more that we will tackle later on, but I think it's important just to notice for now. You are certainly allowed to raise your standards within yourself and for yourself. You can do it quietly. You don't have to talk about it to anybody. You can just feel it. And that's really important, because when you feel that within yourself, you will be reclaiming that energy that's been lost, that's drained away from all these unmet expectations that you might have for others. And I think that's the name of the game. It's managing ourselves and our energy the best way we can. So Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this is helpful and I really look forward to speaking to you next time. Bye for now. Thanks so much for being here with me today. If something in this episode resonated, then trust it. This podcast is part of the High Sensory Mothers body of work for sensitive women who've carried too much and are ready to come home to themselves and what truly matters. You can find out more at highsensorymothers.com. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.